Okay, I want you to forget everything you think you know about the ancient world. We're going to travel back more than 4,000 years to a time when diplomacy wasn't always waged on a battlefield. Nope. It was waged in halls of power by bureaucrats, wielding legal contracts and really strategic gifts. This is the incredible story of how a lost civilization literally wrote the first chapter in the history of international relations. So here's our game plan. First, we'll dig into the incredible discovery of this lost superpower. Then, we're going to explore the super intricate diplomatic game it was playing. After that, we'll zoom in on the world's very first treaty. And believe me, it is a remarkable document. And finally, we'll trace its legacy, a story that was preserved in clay that amazingly stretches right into our modern world. All right, let's start at the beginning. But our story doesn't actually kick off in the Bronze Age. It kicks off in the 1970s with a discovery that completely rewrote the history books. I mean, think about it. We usually consider things like international law, treaties, and complex diplomacy to be pretty modern ideas, right? From the last few centuries, maybe? But what if I told you the basic building blocks were already in place over 4,300 years ago? The proof was just buried under a hill in Syria. You see, before this massive find, our view of the 3rd millennium BC was, well, kind of simple. It was a landscape of warring kings, constantly battling it out, forging the first empires through pure conquest. It's a cool picture for sure, but it turns out it was also missing a huge piece of the puzzle. And then, this happened. Archaeologists at a site called Tel Mardich in northern Syria hit the jackpot. They found a royal archive, and inside, about 20,000 cuneiform tablets, that wedge-shaped writing pressed into wet clay. And the best part? They were perfectly preserved, baked hard by the very fire that destroyed the palace that held them. It was a perfect time capsule. And these weren't just any old records. They were the state archives of a completely forgotten superpower, the Kingdom of Ebla. Suddenly, they revealed this massive city, a huge commercial hub with a trading network that stretched from modern-day Afghanistan all the way to Egypt. We learned about its incredibly complex government. It wasn't just a king calling all the shots. There was a council of elders sharing power, and get this, a bureaucracy of 11,000 people. This was no primitive kingdom. This was a highly organized, massively influential state. So how did a superpower like this act on the world stage? Well, the tablets show Ebla wasn't just sitting there in isolation. It was a major player in a really high-stakes political landscape. You could almost think of it as a kind of Bronze Age Cold War. Its primary rival, the other major player on the board, was the powerful city-state of Mari, located down on the Euphrates River. Now, their power came from different sources. Ebla was a commercial giant. Its strength was in its workshops and trade networks. Mari's power was more traditional, military muscle and tight control over that crucial river trade. Now, you'd probably expect these two rivals to be constantly at war, right? But as this quote suggests, the reality was way more nuanced. Direct conflict was probably just too expensive for both sides. So instead, as the texts show, they played a much, much more sophisticated game. So instead of just fighting it out, they were locked in this complex dance of what we'd now call soft power. They were constantly competing for influence over the smaller kingdoms caught in the middle. They cemented their alliances with strategic royal marriages, and they were always engaged in diplomatic gifting, exchanging textiles, gold, silver. These weren't just presents. They were carefully calculated moves, statements of status and intent. And, this whole complex diplomatic game wasn't just based on handshakes or informal agreements, because among those 20,000 tablets was one that just stands out from all the rest. A legal document that is, as far as we know, the oldest diplomatic treaty in human history. But this treaty wasn't between Ebla and its big rival, Mari. It was between Ebla and a much smaller vassal state called Abarsal. And it is so important to understand, this was not a treaty between equals. It's what historians call a hegemonic treaty, basically a legal tool that a great power uses to formalize its dominance over a lesser one. Just look at the details here. It's incredibly specific. On one side, you've got Ebla's rights, unrestricted river use, exclusive trade deals. And on the other, Abersal's obligations. They have to provide ferry services, and, my favorite part, they have to report any evil plans they overhear. This isn't a partnership, it's a legal framework for total control. So here's the bottom line. This document is a tool of empire, but it's one built on law, not just brute force. Ebla is using a legal system to manage its sphere of influence, to make its power official. And just to make sure everybody follows the rules, the treaty ends with a terrifying list of curses from the gods Shamash and Adad for anyone who even thinks about violating the terms. It is law, backed up by divine power. This world of competing city-states, all bound by this intricate web of diplomacy and legal treaties, it was incredibly advanced. But it was also fragile. A new and much more brutal kind of power was about to sweep across the region and bring Ebla's golden age to a very fiery end. This timeline really puts it all into perspective. You see the rise of Ebla, its diplomatic peak, the signing of that treaty, and then its abrupt end around 2300 BC. The city was destroyed, the palace burned down, which, ironically, is what fired the clay and preserved the tablets for us. And Ebla just vanished from history for over 4,000 years, until its unbelievable rediscovery. So what happened? Well, the whole game changed. A guy named Sargon of Akkad created what many people call the world's first true empire, one based on direct military conquest and centralization. The old system of alliances, treaties, and vassal states, it was just swept away by Sargon's armies. The age of diplomacy gave way to the age of pure military empire. But Ebla's story doesn't end with its destruction. It has this extraordinary modern chapter. In December of 2025, after years of chaos during the recent conflict in Syria, 1,234 tablets from the Ebla archives were returned to the Idlib Museum. Honestly, their survival is just a miracle. The museum was hit by airstrikes over and over, and a local citizen took it upon themselves to rescue whatever they could. For 10 years, this person hid these priceless records of our shared history, protecting them from the war. It's such a powerful reminder that this isn't just ancient history, it's a living, fragile heritage that people today will risk everything to save. And this brings us to one final, really humbling thought. Those 1,234 tablets that were returned, they represent only about half of the archive that went missing from the museum. That means hundreds, maybe thousands, are still out there somewhere. The story of Ebla shows us that entire chapters of human history can be lost and then found again, reminding us that so many secrets about our own origins might still be buried out there, just waiting for us to read them.